Hi guys, this is Darkside Brian here talking about the Lorcana Comprehensive Rules. Lorcana is a super fun new trading card game that's attracting people from many other card games. And of course, if we want to play this game, we need to have some rules. And of course, while there are quick start rules to get us started, eventually we hit a point where we need to understand the nuances of when, why, and how things happen. While there are many resources for learning about this, I find it might be helpful for us to have a video guide going over these nuances. So let's go ahead and check it out. You may notice right here, this document is the comprehensive rules. You can find this, pull up our screen here, by going to DisneyLorcana.com, going to resources, and then finding the Disney Lorcana TCG resources. This will have things like player guides, quick start rules, which is what you'll find in a starter deck, and you'll have Pack Rush, but you want to look for the comprehensive rules. Now these rules come in many different languages because this game exists in many different languages. So choose the one of your choice. For the purposes of this, as you can probably guess, we'll be looking at the English rules. Let's go ahead and get ourselves started. Right here, we have the comprehensive rules right down here. The way I have the screen cropped, we're not able to actually see the name of it, but I promise it's there. We just want to make sure that everything is visible. So as it says down here, we're looking at, hey, please look at the introductory one if you're just getting started, because this is a lot of text. It is about 45 pages long, and while some of that is summaries and glossaries, it still is pretty comprehensive, hence the name comprehensive. So if you look on here, it'll go through all the different sections, all the different areas, all the different things that we're going to be going over. So we'll go ahead and just go through each section one by one. We'll be doing this video in different parts in order for us to spread things apart, as well as to have easy access in the event that we need a quick drop to one place. So we need to go to like section 5, we can have a short video that goes down there, as well as I'll be providing links in the description in order for us to quickly find things. But of course, we start with section 1, concepts. This is going to go over the basic concepts of how the game is, how things are run, what things do, etc., etc. So this is going to be set up in major sections, in subsections, and in sub-subsections. So you'll have things like 1, everything is this like a chapter 1, then you have subsection 1, so on and so forth. So I'll be referencing things using this format. Everything that says 1 is the concepts. So we're going to look at 1.1, which is just general. 1.1.1. Disney Lorcana cards are published in multiple languages. For the purposes of gameplay, the English cards, rules, rulings, and clarifications are the official versions. Because Lorcana comes in many different ways, and many languages are different. We process things differently. The way verbs and nouns and everything are set up are a little bit different. And in the event that we have some discrepancy, it is the guidance of Ravensburger that we utilize the English version to show the intended effects of cards. This is to say that in competitive play, there have been times where Ravensburger has spoken about, hey, let's, understand the different languages that are happening in the European DLCs. Let's be mindful of that. But the official rulings state that we look at English as the main source when we're looking at rulings, questions, and the understanding of cards. Next up here, card text and rules may be updated or corrected. The most current updated version or corrected information is the official version for gameplay. And this has come up once. Many people that have been following Lorcana for a while may know about the card Bucky. We'll go ahead and pull up the card here. On our side screen here, we have Bucky. This card was originally published stating, whenever you play a Floodborn character, each opponent chooses and discards a card. Unfortunately, that became very tough for many players. They had issues with cards being too easy to get discarded, and people weren't able to play the game because they had no hand in a very consistent format. Therefore, Ravensburger decided to release an errata for the card. This errata made a few changes. It was changed to, whenever you play a Floodborn character, if you use Shift to play them, each opponent chooses and discards a card. There are also differences in that Bucky no longer has Ward, and Bucky has an increased cost, going from 2 to 3. This version, even if you have the old card, is the version that is required to be used if you play Bucky. And it is expected in competitive events, or any event that is sanctioned, that you are running this version of the card. Even if there has not been a reprint, even if there has not been a new version released, because this is the version that is in the official companion app, it is required to use this card. Of course, if there are other changes, the comprehensive app is the #1 place to be able to look at them, but Ravensburger will also release press releases in the event that a card changes, because it does make a big impact on the game in general. Let's take a look at our next rule. 1.1.3. The Disney Lorcana TCG is a game played with 2 or more people. Each player needs a deck of Disney Lorcana cards that they'll use in the game. See 2.1 Deck Rules for deck requirements. This is essentially stating that this is a multiplayer game. This is a game that we want people to be able to play with each other. There is no way for us to play this game by ourselves. We cannot play solitaire with ourselves, but everyone will need the correct cards in order to play the game. And then 1.1.4. Each player needs a way to track their lore totals and mark damage on characters and locations. This can be any method players find convenient that is clear to all players in the game. And let's go ahead and show this on the screen here. So, lore, it'll explain later, but lore is essentially the way that we score points in this game. All players start with 0, and then we have to go to 20 is the win condition. And of course, for us to track that, we need to be able to, understand what is going on. How many does so-and-so have? How many does so-and-so have? There are many different ways to be able to do this. Lorcana has a companion app, and in that companion app, you are able to track lore. You're able to have the program just count up for you. And there are many similar programs that do this as well, which is what I'll be pulling up here. This app here is from Illuminarium, and it is pretty much the same thing. 2 players are able to add or subtract their lore. But there are many other ways you can track as well. Some playmats will have numbers on them, and you can use a dice or whatever to keep things going. You can even use dice to say, okay, I've got 7 lore right now. Or if you have a D20 dice, people will utilize that as well. But there are 2 ways that people prefer to track lore. The first is with what is called a lore counter. This is an example of a lore spinner that is officially released by Ravensburger. This is part of the Set 5 Prizing League Pack. So by going to League, you have the ability to win this spinner in whatever way the store decides. And what this does, you count 1, 2, 3, so on and so forth. This can sit anywhere on the playmat, so at any point you're able to see what is going on. Of course, the best way and the recommended way for both casual and competitive play is by using pen and paper. This is something that I received when I was working at a challenge event. And this is a paper that essentially is used to track lore. You can use any paper. You can use any scratch paper. But it's nice having this just because it keeps things pretty even. And all you do, you say, okay, I quest with my character. I'll gain 1 lore. Perfect. Uh-oh, my opponent played goat. They'll gain a lore. And you track this down until you sort of get yourself up to whatever. Let's say big lore game. We got to 10, 15. I'm getting there. Congratulations. Now I am the winner. And this is useful because if you are in a competitive setting, and let's say there's a discrepancy, paper is the easiest way for us to check because we can see how we've gained the lore. We see, okay, we gained 1, then we gained another, we gained 2, we gained 6, then 5, then so on and so forth. So I always recommend to players to try to use paper whenever possible. It's also great because when you're looking back at games, you're able to look things up as well and see, okay, where did we start gaining a lot of lore? Where did we sort of go wrong with places? An important thing to remember about this method of tracking lore is that you're not allowed to write notes about the cards happening. So you can't say, okay, they gained 2 from Sisu, then they gained 3 from, let's say, Chernabog, Sisu. You're not allowed to write information in that way because that is considered note-taking, which in this game, in a competitive settings, is not allowed. So make sure that you are only adding in the totals of each event that has occurred. You can write things like, 1, 2, 3, so you can see, okay, someone quested for 1, quested for 1, quested for 2, even if they all quested at the same time. You can write it like that, but you want to avoid writing tangible notes that can be read and studied. Let's take a look at our next rule. 1.1.5. Disney Lorcana tournaments may have additional rules that can affect the ones in the document. Please refer to the Disney Lorcana TCG tournament rules found here for further reference. This is kind of what I was talking about earlier, in that big tournaments don't allow you to use electronic devices. You'll need to use pen and paper, or you'll need to use a lore counter, or just something that does not connect to the internet. Of course, this is about the comprehensive rules, so you'll have to look at the tournament rules or hopefully be able to make a video about tournament rules that will go on further. But make sure you check those out before those competitions because they may have stipulations as to what you can and cannot do. 1.1.6 states, some cards include reminder text set in italics. Reminder text isn't rules text. It's only a memory aid and may vary without changing the meaning of the keyword rules. Of course, being in the beginning, we haven't quite looked at what a keyword is. We'll look at what keywords are later in our discussion together, but let's go ahead and get a little cursory preview. This card right here is Pegasus. Pegasus is a 2 requires 2 ink to play. He has 3 attack and 1 defense, and he is evasive. Evasive is what is called a keyword. And on this card, you can see in our image here, it says, only characters with evasive can challenge this character. And what that is, what 1.1.6 is saying is that this is not official rules text, but it is rather a way for us to say, okay, he's evasive. What does that mean? Oh, that means that only another evasive character can attack him. So if I'm here and someone, let's say our friend Donald Duck without evasives tries to challenge his character. Uh-oh, he can't because he doesn't have that same text. but it is not official rules text. There may be variation in how it is presented, especially if cards get very wordy, but you should be looking at the comprehensive rules to understand what those cards do. But now we finished our 1.1 section. Let's go to 1.2. 1.2, and this section has lots of examples, which is wonderful. And we'll go ahead and show card examples as well, but let's look into it. 1.2.1 says, if the text of a card contradicts a game rule, the card effect supersedes that rule. Let's read our example. The game doesn't allow a character to challenge a ready character, but a player has a character with an ability that reads, this character can challenge ready characters. The ability overrides the game rule and allows that character to challenge a ready character. Let's take a look at a card that does that. This card here is Pick a Fight. Pick a Fight says, chosen character can challenge ready characters this turn. So if I play this card, I can say, alright, Pegasus can now challenge ready characters. Even if Minnie is able to be on board, she's not exerted, which means I can't challenge, which we'll go over later. Now, because I have played this effect, I am overriding that rule. It says, now I can do this. Now I can challenge. They'll both be banished, so on and so forth. Let's check out the next rule. So here's a game state here. Currently, my opponent has the card Peak Games Referee on board. Peak Games Referee says, when you play this character, opponents can't play actions until the start of your next turn. Now it is my turn. I decide to play Robin Hood Sharpshooter. Robin Hood Sharpshooter says, whenever this character quests, look at the top 4 cards of your deck. You may reveal an action card with cost 6 or less and play it for free. Put the rest in your discard. So the effect goes off, and I get 4 cards, including this card right here. That is Brawl. Brawl is an action. It says banish chosen character with 2 attack or less. So I can choose, let's say I could banish my own Robin, but that's not a good move. So let's say there's a Minnie Mouse here. I'm like, great, let's go ahead and play that for free. Uh-oh, Pete's on board. And because of rule 1.2.2, Pete is saying, even if I have a valid target, because I can't play actions, I cannot play it. So we would all go to the discard, and unfortunately, nothing would happen. I should also clarify that this should be quested. My apologies for any sort of mishaps with how things are placed, but the concept is still there. He quested, the effect went off, and we were unable to play the action because of the Pete. Let's go ahead and check out the next rule. Let's go ahead and take a look at this in action. Slightly different than the example, but I like to show different examples if I can. I have a Magicka Dispel on the field, which says during opponent's turns, if an effect would cause you to discard 1 or more cards from your hand, you don't discard. My opponent decides to play Hypnotize, which I don't own, unfortunately. However, this card says each opponent chooses and discards a card. Draw a card. I have Magicka Dispel, which says I don't discard a card, so I stay put. However, the effect resolves as normal. It is not contingent in this sense on the previous effect happening. I just follow the text as it is. So each opponent chooses and discards a card. I don't discard, and then my opponent draws a card anyway. So we always do as much as we can, except in specific cases that we'll see later in this video. Let's take a look at our next example. 1.2.4, which is a big thing we're going to make sure we'll do a little bit of scrolling. It says, choices that are made as part of an effect are made as the effect is resolving and not as part of playing the card or using the ability with its effect. There's a big example down here, so let's go ahead and analyze it together. This is a very important rule to be able to understand about the game. Oopsie, let me go ahead and fix my... We have here a Cogsworth on field, like the example says. Cogsworth, if we just get him on here, he, of course, is a big boy. He says he has shift 3, he has ward, he's a very nice card to have on field. Let's say my opponent has him, and I, whether it's because I don't read or I forget how cards work, I decide, okay, the best course of action is to pay 3 to play Night Howler Rage. Night Howler Rage is a card that states, draw a card. I'll draw my card. Chosen character gains Reckless during their next turn, which means that they can't quest and must challenge if able. I say, okay, I am going to choose, oh no, I can't choose Cogsworth. What this rule is saying is that this is still a legal move that I can make. It is not, I don't need a target to be able to play the card. I don't need to have a valid target for it to happen. Instead, I resolve as much as I can. So in this effect, I can draw the card. I can legally do that. But then the other effect just doesn't go off. The effect sort of then goes to the graveyard. This also occurs just if there's nothing that can happen at all. For instance, let's say I play the card, and we'll just pull it up on our page real quick. Get to see the secrets. I go ahead and play Madame Medusa the Boss, which says when you play this character, banish chosen opponent character with 3 attack or less. Of course, I can't choose Cogsworth because he has ward. So I do as much as I can, which is nothing. She just appears, which is great. 4/4 body, we love to see that, but not quite getting the effect, even if I want to get the effect. This is important to know too, because as long as a card is legally able to be played, and if you play it correctly, it is played. Which will come up a lot more later as we're looking at what is playing a card, what is an illegal activation, so on and so forth. But playing a card, even if you can't resolve the effect, is not an illegal play, which, as I said, we'll get more into later. Let's go ahead and keep on scrolling down. We're going to the second page, and we'll look at this quick little subsection, the active player. When a player starts their turn, they become the active player. When a player ends their turn, they're no longer the active player. Very self-explanatory. When I play Medusa, I am the active player. Then during the next turn, my opponent plays, let's say, they play Pegasus. They're the active player. They're playing something back and forth. Let's look at our next section, the opponent. This is the flip side. Anyone a player is playing against is their opponent. In multiplayer games, which is 1.4.2 gets into, some game formats allow players to designate one or more players as teammates. Such teammates are identified before the game starts. As teammates aren't playing against each other, they aren't opponents to one each other. What that also implies is that we have multiple opponents. We can have multiple teammates and multiple opponents. We are able to have larger game states. This goes back into looking at card effects the way they are written. You may notice that on many cards we have, like this one, Lady Tremaine, when you play this character, each opponent chooses and banishes one of their characters. It is explicitly written to say each opponent. That means if you're playing with 4 people, if we've got this crazy game going on, then I say, okay, I'm gonna play Lady Tremaine. Uh-oh. Everyone banishes something. Uh-oh, we've just wiped the board. Of course, let's say that we had teammates. Let's say we were doing 2 versus 2. I play Tremaine. Nothing is banished here. Cogsworth goes, and Robin Hood goes, etc., etc. Let's go ahead and look at the next section. 1.5, playing cards. Players can play a card whenever they're the active player and there are no effects to resolve. To play a card, the player reveals it from their hand and pays the cost. See 4.3.4. This has actually become a big question that I've been asked, so I'll go ahead and demonstrate what playing a card is. We'll go over the more nuanced details about playing a card in the later relevant section, 4.3.4, but what we will go over the basic steps. What we do is that we first reveal the card from our hand. So if I have 3 cards in hand, I'm going to reveal to my opponent Pete. Now, what we do is once we reveal it, and once we've determined the total what it costs, which in this case will be 3 ink, we will pay 1, 2, 3, and we will play it from our hand. This is Pete. Of course, there are many ways people choose to speed this process up. There are many ways that people choose to play, but this is the intended way. You reveal the card, you pay the cost, and you put it in the play area. Of course, we'll go over that a little bit later in our time together. Let's take a look at the next section. 1.6, types of abilities. These will all be elaborated upon in later sections, but let's take a look for now. There are several kinds of abilities in the Disney Lorcana TCG. 1.611 states, keywords are words or shortened phrases that represent a larger ability or abilities. See section 10 for the full list of current keywords. And keywords we've already talked about with cards like Pegasus. They are the things with keywords that let us know what special abilities they have, and they often have reminder text on them. Even Lady Tremaine has Shift 4, which is a keyword, because it's reminding us that we can pay 4 to shift it onto another Tremaine, which we'll assume we have. 1.6.12 states, triggered abilities continuously look for a specific condition and have an effect when that condition is met. Triggered abilities follow the rules in section 7.4. Here I've got 4 cards that are going to go over each of these effects. We talked about triggered abilities. If I'll scroll up just a little bit so we can see it. Beautiful. Merlin Rabbit right here is a triggered ability. It says when you play this card and when he leaves play, you may draw a card. And what this means is that this effect occurs whenever the trigger is met. So let's say we're playing the game and we have Merlin Rabbit. He's exerted. And let's say my opponent has a Pegasus on board who has enough attack to defeat Merlin. They will challenge. Pegasus will be defeated. Rabbit will be defeated as well. And then his effect enters the bag, which we will talk about later, but his effect triggers. Next, we'll go ahead and take a look at activated abilities. This item right here is Ruby Chromicon. Ruby Chromicon states that you exert the item, chosen character gets +1 this turn. What this means is that we have Merlin Rabbit. We use Ruby Chromicon. We will exert it to give Merlin +1 attacking ability. That'll make him a 3/3 character. He will have 3 strength and 3 willpower. And of course, what the activate ability means is that I've paid the cost and then applied that cost. Next, we will have static abilities. Static abilities are something that continually exists, essentially, either if there's a time or until the card finishes, until the card states what it is. So we're looking at Sisu here. Sisu in Bolden Warrior states, this character gets +1 strength for each card in your opponent's hand. Let's say my opponent has put us down here so we can see the board. Let's say my opponent has 2 cards in hand. Sisu gains 1 strength for each of those, so now she has 3 strength and 4 willpower. Of course, let's say my opponent discards 2 cards. Now Sisu is at 1 strength. This consistently looks and changes as the game goes on. So it is constantly looking in order to calculate that strength. And this will happen as long as Sisu is in play. So if and when Sisu is removed or banished, that effect no longer is occurring. The last one we have is replacement effects. Replacement effects are generated by some static abilities. These replace one effect with another. Replacement effects follow the rules in section 7.7. One of the most common replacement effects is Bodyguard. Here we have an example of a very generic Bodyguard card, Simba. This states that he has Bodyguard, which he may enter play exerted. An opposing character who challenges one of your characters must choose one with Bodyguard if able. So what that means is that when we play Simba, we can note, so we reveal, we pay the cost, we pay 2 ink, and we state that we are going to play him with Bodyguard. So instead of playing him regularly, we replace his summon with Bodyguard. He enters play exerted, and then if I have a bunch of other cards in play, I know this is 3 colors, but it's okay, we're just demonstrating. And if I have 2 things exerted, and my opponent's Merlin wants to attack, he has to attack the Simba. He cannot attack Chernobog's followers. But of course, we'll get into that later. Let's go ahead and check out the next section. 1.6.2 states, whenever an effect would affect multiple players at the same time, the active player resolves that effect first. Then, in turn order, each other player resolves that effect. Let's say we're the active player right here, and I'm going to show 2 examples of this happening. The first one we touched upon a little bit earlier. We play Lady Tremaine. Each opponent chooses and discards a character. Pardon me, let me go ahead. I was looking for a different card that would have worked, but unfortunately we don't own that card, you know? Keep your collections, guys. So, Lady Tremaine is back in town. So, how would we do this? They don't all leave at the same time. Let's say we're going in clockwise order. This player banishes first, then this one, then this one. In the event that everyone does something, like with this card, Amethyst Chromicon, I'll just go ahead and pull up Chromicon. This one states, exert. Each player may draw a card. So we wouldn't all draw at the same time, technically. Functionally, people may choose to do that, but the way it's supposed to work is, okay, I draw a card. Yay. Then this guy draws a card. Then this guy. Then this guy. So on and so forth. And the effect has resolved. And that's very important when it comes to things that could affect our ability to win the game. Let's check out an example of that. We're back here at our game state. Everyone, we have 4 people that are in this game. Lady Tremaine is on the field, and I'm going to choose to sing this song, A Whole New World. I exert to sing it, and now we're going to go ahead and resolve that effect. I will start off, I will discard my hand, and I will draw 7 cards. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Perfect. I am done. My opponent is going to discard their hand and draw 7 cards. 1, 2, 3, 4. Uh-oh. They don't have enough cards. That's not great. And we'll get into that later, but just remember that has happened in that order. So that player is out. They are unable to draw any more cards. This player then goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Perfect. This player discards 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Perfect. The ability has finished resolving. We can go ahead and toss Whole New World in the discard pile. And then we have finished resolving that card. And the consequences of such will go in that order. Let's go ahead and continue our quest. We'll go ahead and go to 1.7. I mentioned it before. This is the bag. This is 1.7, the bag. The bag is the zone where triggered abilities wait to resolve. It's not a physical zone, but a way to picture the process of resolving triggered abilities. You can think of each triggered ability as a marble, and the bag as a place to put them until they're resolved. Each marble is separate from every other marble, and a player can look through the bag of marbles to select the one they wish to resolve next. We mentioned the bag a little bit earlier, but this is the way that we resolve effects. This is the way that when things happen at the same time, we say, okay, what happens? 1.7.2 says it's possible for both the active player and their opponents to add triggered abilities to the bag at the same time. Resolving these abilities follows the rules in section 8.7 bag. So how do things enter the bag? We'll go into it more in the section 8 chapter, but let's do a little basic look. The bag happens whenever an effect happens. So let's say I spend 4 to play Merlin Goat. His effect, when you play this character and when he leaves, you gain 1 lore. So congratulations, we have successfully played Merlin Goat, pardon me. So we are going to gain 1 lore. Yay, move our counter 1, we've done it. That effect enters the bag and then resolves out of the bag because it's the only effect that happened. Let's say we have a different situation. Let's say that we have this card here, Magic Broom. Magic Broom, a Luminary Keeper, says whenever you play another character, you may banish this character to draw a card. Which means that when I play Merlin Goat, I have the ability to choose to banish Broom to draw an extra card. Of course, there are 2 effects that are happening at the same time. What order do I resolve them in? Well, I can make that choice as the turn player for my own effects. So I say, okay, let's gain the lore first, put me up, and then I'll banish Broom for his effect to draw a card. Of course, this can get very fun and very exciting, so we'll take a look at that in the later section. But for right now, that's the general concept of the bag. It's where things go to happen. Let's take a look at 1.8, the player's cards. Cards a player brings to the table in their deck are their cards, and that player makes any decisions necessary for the card and its effects unless specified by an effect. So let's take a look at that. We own our cards. We purchase them. They are ours to use, or we have been authorized to use them. We say what happens with them. So even with Magic Broom, when you play another character, you may banish this character to draw a card. That is your choice to do that. You are the one doing it because it is your card. And 1.8.2 and 1.8.3 kind of go into that. His, her, it's theirs, referring to the person who played the card. His, her, it's theirs, referring to the player's turn. You is very similar. Card effects address the player who played that card. Whenever a card refers to you, it's referring to the player of the card, even if the ability containing the reference was granted by an opposing effect. So what it's saying, whenever you play another character, you may banish this character to draw a card. However, what the second part says is very interesting. Even if the ability containing the reference was granted by an opponent's effect. Right here, my opponent has Tropical Rainforest, which states opposing damage characters gain Reckless. Reckless states that you cannot quest and must challenge if able. So even though it's granted by my opponent that Simba now has Reckless, the you still refers to me. If we're looking at we're essentially adding text saying reckless with reminder text, you cannot, so. I still have to make the decision to not attack and to not quest, my apologies, and then challenge if able, if there is a valid target. So pronouns are very important. So it's very important to read what and who a card is referring to. And while many cards will, of course, refer to giving you choices, some cards may force your opponent to make a choice. We saw this with Lady Tremaine, which specifically states that your opponent is the one choosing the card to discard. If I can find it in this wonderful pile of cards that I have. Beautiful. Lady Tremaine, will go ahead and pull up our text again so that we can see it together. Lady Tremaine, when you play this character, each opponent chooses and banishes one of their characters. So this is you when you play it. Your opponent chooses and then banishes. Let's go ahead and check out the next section, 1.9. 1.9 is called a game state check. This is one of my favorite sections because it essentially states, when do we understand when things happen? When do we resolve things? When do we check to see if we've won, if we're the big winners? Let's read on. 1.9.1 states, there is a set of conditions the game checks for which certain required actions happening when one of more of those conditions is met. This is called a game state check and is made up of two parts, the game state condition and the required action. A game state condition is a specific circumstance the game state can achieve. A required action is what happens in the game when a game state condition is met. The following are the conditions that the game state check looks for and the required action it creates. We go on to 1.9.1.1, which states, if a player has 20 or more lore, that player wins the game. Let's go back to our friend Merlin Goat. Let's say that my opponent has 19 lore and has a Merlin Goat on board. I play my Lady Tremaine. I say, you fool, you have to take away one of your cards. Great. Merlin Goat goes. His effect goes off. When he leaves play, I gain a lore. I go to 20. The game state check then says, great, all effects are resolved. Let's check. Oh, the opponent has 20 lore. The opponent is the winner. Good job. 1.9.1.2 states, if a player attempted to draw a card from a deck with no cards since the last game state check, that player loses the game. This is what I mentioned earlier with our Whole New World situation. Whole New World. Uh-oh. I only have 3 cards in deck. I've attempted to draw. Oh no. I can't really do anything. Now I have to wait for the ability to finish resolving. I'm just kind of in limbo right now. Da-da-da. My opponent does. Whole New World has finished resolving. I have lost. Because I attempted to draw and I had no more cards in my deck. Oh no. That is very unfortunate. And then 1.9.1.3 states, if a character or location has damage equal to or greater than its willpower, that character or location is banished. So let's say I've got these guys on board. And let's go back to our tropical rainforest. Let's go ahead and go tropical. Great. So, I say, okay, Madam Mim is going to challenge the tropical rainforest. I have dealt 3 damage to the tropical rainforest. I'm using dice to represent the amount of damage on the location. Lady Tremaine then challenges into tropical rainforest. We see now we have dealt 6 damage to this rainforest. Because it is equal to or greater than the willpower, rainforest is banished. Now, when do these game state checks happen? 1.9.2 states, a game state check is made at the end of every step after any action or ability is finished resolving, and after each effect in the bag is finished resolving. During a game state check, first check and complete all win and loss conditions and required actions. Then, if there are no win or loss conditions met, check and complete all other conditions and required actions. Once all required actions are complete, the game state check repeats until there are no further actions to complete. Triggered abilities that occurred during this process are then added to the bag to resolve. 1.9.2.1 states, any required actions generated from a game state check happen in turn order. If a player would win and lose the game at the same time as a result of the same game state check, that player wins the game. Let's go ahead and check out a bunch of actions happening at the same time. This is my board. I have 2 Merlin goats, which we've already talked about, and then 1 Merlin rabbit, which is the draw card. My opponent has a Merlin goat on board, and my opponent is at 19 lore. I am at 18 lore. Suddenly, during my turn, I decide to spend 7 ink to play Be Prepared. Be Prepared is a card that states banish all characters. All characters are banished at the same time. And what happens, now they're banished, we've got 4 effects that simultaneously have entered the bag. And what do we do with them? Well, as it states in 1.9.2.1, the actions generated from that game state check, when we see, okay, we have 4 things that have entered, been banished, and they've entered the bag, we go ahead and, because we are the turn player, we have first priority for resolving those effects. So let's say, for some reason, we decide, okay, so we are going to, we've resolved Be Prepared. Okay, we check the game state, nobody has 20 lore, we have 4 things that are entering the bag. The effect says they all got banished, so now they're all in the discard pile, which they are going to be there. I'm just putting it out here for demonstration purposes. We say, okay, next effect. I'm going to resolve Merlin Rabbit first. Great. I draw a card. Good job, me. Okay, game state check. Let's see, still 1819. No new things have happened. We drew the card. Okay, next one. All right, well, I'm going to resolve Merlin Goat. I will go up to 19 lore. Okay, game state check. Okay, well, now this has happened. There's 2 effects in the bag. Nobody's won yet. There's no new things that have damage on it that need to be banished. Okay, next one. I resolve Merlin Goat again. I go to 20. Game state check. Okay, well, now he has 20. Great, we've done it. Game over. We are the winner. We don't... this other Merlin Goat does not resolve because we have met the game state condition. The game is not a draw. The game is not kind of in this weird limbo state. The game is over because the win condition was met at the game state check. And we'll talk a little bit more about game state checks, but it's important to understand that a game state check happens pretty often. So even if you have effects that are happening simultaneously, the game will continually check to make sure that effects are going to resolve in the correct order, in the turn player order, and one at a time. Even if during gameplay we go, okay, I'll be prep and 3 goats and I do yada yada, it's essentially speed running through what is supposed to be happening, which is the game state check happening every single time. It's important to also remember, this gets talked to me quite often, is that game state checks are very important when dealing with damage. As we say, the character location has damage equal to or greater than its willpower, the character or location is banished. What that means is that characters do not get banished because of the attacks. They get damaged because of game state checks. Let's say Merlin Goat. My opponent has a Merlin Rabbit that is exerted. I say, okay, Merlin Goat is going to challenge Merlin Rabbit. All the steps happen, everything happens, which we'll go into in the section that is designated for it. Merlin Rabbit will have 3 damage counters on it. and Merlin Goat will have 2 damage counters on him. The game state, inherently Merlin attacking just puts 4 counters, my apologies. Getting ahead of myself, will have 4 counters on it, and Merlin will have 2. During the game state check, we realize, uh-oh, Merlin Rabbit has 4 damage counters on it. That's more than his willpower. Yoink, he's gone. And then his effect activates, yada, 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 but essentially that's the point. He does not leave play until the game state check that says, hey, uh-oh, something has happened. But of course, that will come up in many different situations. There are many popular situations where this even comes up. Let's take a look at an example of this happening. Of course, I've chosen to do this example with a card that I don't own. Both cards I don't own for this, so we're going to have to play some imagination here. On board, my opponent has an Exerted Diablo Devoted Herald. Diablo Devoted Herald says, during each opponent's turn, whenever they draw a card while this character is exerted, you may draw a card. I'm thinking, ooh, that's going to be a lot of value. I don't want that to happen, so I am going to knock him out with Let the Storm Rage On. This card states, deal 2 damage to chosen character. Draw a card. So I'm like, all right, we're going to get him. I'm going to use my proxy card to be like, yes, I reveal the card, Let the Storm Rage On. I pay my 3 ink, and I go, boom, this is my target. He is gone. So we deal the 2 damage counters to him, and then I say, great, I also draw a card. What happens? Well, as we stated, the game state check does not happen until the action is resolved. So Diablo now has 2 damage counters on him. Ouchie, ouch. I am drawing a card. And then my action is done. Storm Rage On goes to the discard pile. We are good. Game state check happens. Does anyone have 20 or more lore? Pretend this didn't happen. No. Nobody has 20 or more lore. Did we attempt to draw from the deck with no cards since the last game state check? No, nobody. Like my person drew, a Storm Rage On drew, but that didn't deck them out. Cool. They were able to do that. Does a character location have damage equal to or greater than its willpower? Yes. Diablo does. My opponent then draws a card. What? You say, Judge, he drew a card even though Diablo isn't there. Let me explain what happened. So, Let the Storm Rage On states, deal 2 damage to chosen character, draw a card. We have dealt that 2 damage, and we have drawn a card. Diablo states, during each opponent's turn, whenever they draw a card while this character is exerted, you may draw a card. You notice that Diablo is still on the field when I'm drawing a card, so his effect will still trigger and will still enter the bag. This enters the bag, Storm Rage On finishes resolving, Diablo leaves the field. However, Diablo's effect is still in the bag. Characters, unless it is stated in the actual effect, do not need to be on the field for their bag effects to resolve. The effect just had to happen. We see that even with cards like Merlin Goat. He's not on the field, but yet because he left play, even if he goes back to the deck, his effect will still enter the bag because the condition is met. So because they drew a card while Diablo was exerted on the field, even though he has left play, because it happened before the game state check, the opponent will draw that card as well. This is why understanding how things happen is so important to understanding how card interactions work. We understand when things happen, why things happen, and when triggers happen for things to continue going on. And we always want to make sure that we're keeping an eye on there, because if we forget these things, that can get us into a little bit of trouble. We'll go ahead and check out the rest of this section. Once a required action is completed, the game state check occurs again. Abilities that trigger as a result of the game state check are added to the bag as soon as the check any required actions are fully completed. If multiple required actions would happen at once, a single combined required action takes place, and all the required actions happen simultaneously. This kind of goes off with what we were explaining earlier. With every time an action is completed, the game state check will continue to occur. It occurs after every action or ability is finished resolving, etc., etc. And then when they are added because of like game state checks, so Merlin has 4 damage on him. Let's say 5, that's what I put. He goes in, it's added to the bag at that time. Let's go ahead and check out our last section, multiplayer games. Multiplayer games are games played with 3 or more players. Team games are a subset of multiplayer play that are not covered in this document. We don't really cover multiplayer games, however, they are still fun and important, and we can understand the basic rules of it. We've talked a little bit about it already when explaining different rules, but we'll go ahead and go over these effects here. Multiplayer games follow the same rules as 2-player games. At the end of each player's turn, player proceeds to the player on their left, rather than going back and forth across the table. If an ability requires more than one player to do something, the active player does it first, then left, yada yada yada, stuff we've already talked about. If a player must draw a card and their deck has run out, they lose and must immediately leave the game. All of that player's cards and effects are removed from the game, including any static effects that would have ended during their current or future turns. So let's say we look at, let's pull up some text. Let's say I'm playing a multiplayer game. We have all this kind of fun stuff going on. Yay, we love to play with friends. And then suddenly, one of the opponents says, hey, whole new world. Uh-oh, I only have 2 cards. So, of course, the effect goes off. I am waiting for this to resolve. They draw their usual. I have lost the game. So now, because of that, everything on my board goes away. And because Tropical Rainforest has gone away, we no longer... damaged characters are no longer affected by Tropical Rainforest. So even if they are, I put 3, we're going to put 2, even if they, have the effect at first, now because I'm gone from the game, that effect is gone. It is officially over. It's kind of like, in a 2-player game, once the game is over, the effects don't happen because the player is gone. So these 3 continue to play the game, but not with any of my effects happening. And play goes on as such. They no longer have Reckless. Things still happen until someone wins. This is a bit of an interesting section. Talking about multiplayer game formats using simultaneous turns. During simultaneous turns, all players of the same team progress through the phases and steps of the game at the same time. So, like, let's say all 3 would draw at the same time. They would enter, ready, set, yada yada at the same time. Then during the main phase, the players can take any turn action they could normally take in any player order they wish. Players must complete 1 turn action in its entirety before moving to the next turn action. So, let's say we're playing multiplayer, and let's say our opponent's 3 opponents are like this. Player 2 can say, okay, I activate B prep. Player 1 goes, okay, well, I play Merlin Rabbit now. Yay. Player 2 says, okay, well, I'm going to play Queen's Castle. They can do it in any order they wish, although things have to finish resolving before they continue. If triggered abilities or effects are added to the bag by multiple players during a simultaneous turn, these triggered abilities or effects are added to the bag by the team as a whole, and the order in which they are resolved in is chosen by the team. Otherwise, resolving follows the same rules as 8.7 the bag. This example here just kind of explains all of it. It's kind of a long thing, so we'll go ahead and just summarize it. 3 players. They have, their cards Okay, we're going to ready our board, get all these characters here. We have these exerted. Okay, it's our turn. We're going to ready everything, set, nothing, no triggers, and we're all going to draw. Yay. All right, now we're in the main phase. Now we each choose to do our own thing. So let's say, okay, I'm going to quest with Robin Hood, and I'm going to try to find my action. Okay, Brawl is there. Brawl whatever's on my opponent's field. Fantastic. I can't go in and say, okay, now that you've done that, I go ahead and play B Prep. No, you have to wait until this is resolved. Boom, bam. Okay, now I'm going to play Goat. I'm going to do so-and-so. Quest for one, so on and so forth. And then we all end at the same time. And any triggers that are there at the end phase happen at that time. They happen at the same time. And that was chapter 1. Ooh, a long chapter, but getting the real basics of gameplay going in. This chapter is more so kind of a vague guide about how to understand the rest of the chapters. There are many different chapters that go into specifics. We've talked about abilities and challenging and the bag and all this kind of stuff, but this is the overarching kind of beginning guide and will give us reference as to how to handle everywhere else. So, thanks so much for listening in to Chapter 1. As I said, this is sort of a proof of concept about if this video will be helpful. It's different setup things. So, we're going to hopefully be able to view other parts of the game and hopefully get ourselves further involved. I thank you all so much for taking the time to watch this. I hope this has been helpful in your understanding of how the game works. And I hope to see you in the next video. Thanks so much.